Hello, everyone. Very good afternoon. So can anyone confirm that I'm audible? Yes. I'm doing this session through Zoom and it's been restreamed to LinkedIn. Um, so if you have any questions, you can put it on the LinkedIn comments or YouTube comments. I'll pick it up from there. I'll start the session in a minute. Team, I hear a background noise. Can you hear my background noise? Just trying to fix it. Give me a minute. Can you hear me now? Okay. All right. Apologies for a few minutes late. I hope my voice is clear now. Okay. So, as promised, first session on building successful AI startup. Um, so I've been mentoring startups past 10 years, actually 14 years, but AI startups particularly from last 7 years. I've been a part of many government bodies, including NASCOM as a lead startup mentor. And myself have been a co-founder for many startups. In the last 3, 4 years, mostly to AI startups. So I've learned a lot of things, and also not just from my startup, from entering many startups from different industries, different kind of people. So I thought of sharing some of the insights I've learned. And today is the first session. And just start building on this. All right, so I have taken certain topics. So I'm going to focus on this. This is going to be a 30-minute session, and I'm sure that it is not sufficient. So there might be a part 2 or probably part 3 as well. We'll try to cover as much as possible in this session. The first topic is identifying the market need, or what exactly you want to address, where do you want to build your startup. And then having a clear vision. A lot of startups think that they have a clear vision, but later they discover it's a lot of not so clear things in it. So how do you have a clear vision? What are the things you should be taking care in that area? And building your core team is really important. It could be co-founders or initial employees. So how do you do that? And then you work on the prototype or minimal viable product, the pilot one. There's a lot of questions always I get from here. Should we start for funding before this, or should we build a prototype? And if it's a prototype, how it should be? So I have some ideas I like to discuss in this topic. And of course, securing funding. So which is a better way. Probably we will try to cover the funding, if not for the next session. I also have other things. Then after that, how do you focus on product building? Because building prototype is one, and then building a full-fledged product is completely a different thing. So how do you do that? And how do you validate your product development through feedbacks, which is very, very crucial. And at some point of time, you need to get your top executives, the CXOs, like, finance manager, chief finance manager, marketing, chief finance officer, chief marketing officer, of course, CEO, mostly will be the founder. And then you have other roles, including HR and other things. So how do you take care of this? And is it necessary? And when it is necessary? And how does it affect your startup? And then market your startup. And you have to market your startup based on its B2B or B2C. B2B is relatively on the easy side because business buyers are usually rational buyers. B2C is usually value focused, and you require marketing strategy, right? So how do you do that? And then how do you scale up your startup to an enterprise or to a large companies? Because building a successful startup is very different from building an organization, and a lot of companies actually fail to scale. They actually fail during the scaling of your startup, right? So we will discuss that. Probably we'll cover 4 or 5 topics today, and we will take it the rest for the next times. The things which I'm not covering in this session, I put it there. It could be for the future sessions. One is that AI product versus service. So what is recommended? Is it a product-based AI startup or the service-based AI startup, which is more lucrative? And how do you do the building blocks of your startup? Should we buy it, which is existing, or should we build it? And how do you make the decision, make or buy decision? And what are the how do you build would you build a solution for a niche market, or you do it a more broader application? All of these things are very subjective. It really depends on the use case, your own competence and passion. These are different topics which we might cover in the not these sessions, but a separate different webinar. Also, expansion. Is it advised to expand internationally or strengthen your local presence first? Should you go for venture capitalist, angel investment, or you put your own money? Bootstrapping. So do you go for organic growth, or you have to go for an aggressive growth with putting a lot of money in marketing and scaling up fast, which is more advised, right? And then resourcing. Would you build in-house capacity to have qualified colleagues, or outsourcing AI certain expertise is something which you should look at? And also the ethics. This is becoming more important nowadays. AI ethics is really important, right? So how do you prioritize your startup? Is innovation at all costs, or you have to take care of the ethical constraints? If yes, to what extent? These are the topics I'm not covering in this session, but I'll try to cover them, and maybe I'll start a new webinar series on the future sessions. All right, so the first one, identifying the market need. This is something which is really important. Close this window. Very important. Many startups come up with great ideas, right? Sometimes the idea is actually technology trying to fit to a problem. All right. Um, I after all this experience and working with many startups, it's really important for you to find the problem in the market, a real need, and then try to see if AI can solve it. You don't try to fit an AI to the problem. You see if the AI can solve it. If yes, is it effective and efficient than any other solutions outside? Is there an opportunity for a startup? I'll just put a small example here. For example, if you're looking at a startup idea of building a, finding an available parking space. These are many startups out there in the market, some of them in Netherlands, which I have mentored some time ago. And, it actually makes sense to use AI and stuff because you can have the detailed data of the available parking space. You can do some analytics and all that stuff, right? But you can also have a very simple solution, like in this case, this is a simple gas balloon, right? If you put it on the parking lot, the fag end of the parking lot, when the vehicle is actually parked, it pushes the rope and the balloon comes down, right? As you can see, right? And if the car leaves, then automatically this will pop up and it rises and shows that there is available parking space there. And this is really cheap, easily maintainable. You can deploy it anywhere. You don't need electricity, no cameras. This is an excellent, simple solution. So sometimes because you're trying to fit an AI to the problem, you may not see this. And if you discover this at a later point of time, then all the efforts you're putting is kind of waste. So it's really important to find a real market need, which cannot be solved by other traditional methods, and then try to see if AI can solve the problem. If yes, can it be a startup, etc. Right? So it's important to discuss and identify a specific problem that can be addressed with AI or that can be solved by AI effectively when compared to other alternative solutions. It's also important to do the research, the market gaps. So if there is an existing product or something near to it, right? You should see how much gap that they have the existing solution to your particular problem. The reason this is important is if you don't do this properly, you might actually go ahead and start building a great product, AI product. But if someone is already an existing player, slightly doing different from what this problem is, for them, it's easy to develop the solution for this identified problem you have identified. And they might already have an existing customer base, so they will simply take the market share. And then you will have a problem actually selling your product. Might be better than the existing one, better than the one which is built by the existing player, but you'll still have difficulty acquiring because there is an alternate solution in the market and a credible company or an established company behind it. So it's very important to do a proper market research of what's your actual market need or the problem, and see where are the existing providers and how difficult for them to actually provide this. This is also very useful for collaborate with some of the companies, right? So market research, identifying the market gaps is really important. Also, it's important to find the customer pain, right? And I see that many young startups, young folks, most of the startups are actually young folks, few years from the college, few years of work experience, very energetic. They probably find a really good problem statement, right? And there is a need for it. What they miss is that understand the customer pain point, right? What is the customer? To put it in a very simple way, is the problem really an important one, right? Or it is just a nice to have thing? Now, let me tell you, if the problem you identified isn't very important or something which is really a pain point for your customer, then the chances that will be successful, the chances the customer buying your product is less. So you might build a great product, but if it's just a nice to have product, it is difficult for you to actually sell it. we call it as in a marketing research, we call it as there is a utility requirement and there is a hedonic. Hedonic is essentially a pleasure related. Right? Sometimes you might actually build a product which actually gives you more pleasure. For example, your Instagram and many other social media apps more comes under hedonic needs rather than utility, right? But you should be very careful understanding what exactly is a customer pain point. But if you're looking at more an entertainment value, right, then you should be also very sure, you know, um, how addictive it is and stuff like that. And then analyze the sustainability of the need. And this is another important thing. Um, it's one thing to find a problem in the market, right, or the actual market need, and it's completely other to see whether it is sustainable, right? Because you might have a requirement in the market now. If it is not sustainable, if the need itself disappears by another competing product or some technology breakthrough or disruption, or even a change in business models, then it's a problem. For example, many startup companies which started during the COVID times, right? There is a huge demand because most people are working online, right? And there are a lot of technology-based, service-based startups which were doing excellent during the COVID time, and people who are not going to office, they're working mostly online. But once the people start resuming their normal life of physically going to the offices, and the demand for those products came down drastically, and they struggle to keep up with the growth, and eventually they will end up in problems. So it's also important to analyze whether the need is sustainable, right? And that's also very key. Not just the need, and also your solution is sustainable over a longer period, the period which you want to, you know, make make business out of this particular AI startup. All right. So that's you are identifying a market need. Let me see if you have any questions that you know on this particular slide. Okay. Okay. So I don't know. I don't see any questions on this. Okay. Good. I'm logging into LinkedIn as well. So okay. Okay, I don't see any. I have a question from Mohammed saying AI gives more explainability than we ask. When we ask. Okay, that's true. Moving on to the next slide. So the takeaway from this slide is that you do your research very, very well, because this you might spend a lot of time, and it's important that this time is really worth before you take any before you put any significant efforts in terms of your startup idea. I have a question from LinkedIn saying how Indian government is helping AI startups. I'll answer this question. There's a lot of, I mean, especially when you look at it, NASSCOM is one of the biggest body, and they've been mentoring. I'm a part of a NASSCOM as well. Not now, I'm not really mentoring any startup, but I used to do a lot of startup mentoring to NASSCOM. That's one of the Indian government body, which helps in mentoring and also funding startups, technology startups. We also have a specific division on NASSCOM called DTC, which is Deep Tech Club, which is specializing on AI startups, supporting AI startups. All right. The second point is having a clear vision. All right. Most of the time when you get a new idea, you're very excited about it. And then it's a real problem when you ask few people, do a bit of survey, or you speak around with some of the people, they're also very excited. And then it looks like, okay, fantastic, let's do it. But it's important to have a clear vision about what you're building and how are you going to take it to the market and how are you going to monetize it, what's your model, right? And maybe sometimes you should also have an exit strategy before even you start your startup, right? Are you going to maintain and provide service in the longer term, or you're expecting some other big companies to take over your startup or buy your startup, right? So you should have a very clear vision, and it's also important to have a clear vision because it will help you to articulate it, not just to the investors and partners, but also to your own colleagues. If you have a clear vision, you could basically articulate it better, communicate it better. The chances of your team members, the first employees will align to your vision will be more stronger. So you should define what's your short-term and long-term goals. How are you going to manage it? And it doesn't need to be very clear. Let me tell you. So it's conflicting what the slide says. I'm talking about the short-term. Short-term goal should be clear, of course. The long-term goal, it doesn't have to be clear, but it should have a direction. The direction, strategic direction is important for a long-term goals. And of course, you need to align your team to the startup vision. Let me tell you, most of the startups, the core strength is your team, right? And most of the time, the startup employees don't work for their salaries. Of course, you need to pay the market rates for sure, but they usually work for the feeling of they're doing something interesting. They're adding value, right? And they are very motivated people. That usually you find more passionate employees in startups when compared to a large companies. I think you all know that. For them to keep that passion and motivate them to work towards the startup's goal, you should be aligning the teams with your startup vision, right? And to do that, you should have a clear vision. And also your vision will help you in decision making and problem solving. So you encounter numerous decision making problems, right? Sometimes suddenly when you're talking about a startup idea, some other partners or venture capitalists will put another idea to you. Like, you know what, why don't you do that? Why don't you add this new feature? Why don't you tweak this to a different model? You get this all the time, right? Unless you have a clear, strong vision, you get distracted. And sometimes you can't defend your ideas or your explanations, and then you get confused. So you should really have a strong, clear vision that helps you in decision making, also motivating your team and problem solving. I have another question from Kavita from LinkedIn. And should we also think of scalability at this point? Good question. I'll reserve that longer answer to the end. But scalability should be thought at a broader perspective. Not really how are you going to scale, but you should think from do you have a demand for scale? How big is your target audience, right? How much, what's your entire revenue stream that is possible 100%? How much market share you could get at various stages in your startup has to be has to be at least clear to some extent before you start to answer the question. The answer is yes, but to an extent that to help you in startup, to make it more viable, not into real numbers or more near numbers. A rough estimate should be done anywhere. I have another question as well. Which industries or domains have most use cases for it? Right now, healthcare, finance, technology itself has a lot of AI use cases. These are the top three. Probably I'll share more details after this session. The third one is building your core team. And I already told you in the previous point that core team is what makes your startup successful, right? And building a right core team is super important. And I don't have to tell you, anyone who has worked in a startup or worked in a small companies might know this. Aligning the first is skill set. Your team should have a required skill set, right? The core competence should be within your core team. The core skills should be within your core team. That's really important. And assembling them, right? The diverse, different skills required to drive your startup's vision is a really important as well as a challenging thing. A lot of time has to be invested on it diligently. You cannot just take the team based on the skills and ignore all the things. You should really look at the skill set, their passion towards your startup, if they believe in your startup. Otherwise, it's going to fall apart at some point of time, right? If they're only working for a salary, for startup, it doesn't work, right? When I say core team, it might also include your co-founders who believe your vision, or maybe it's a shared vision between your co-founders, right? Should also be very clear who is doing what and they're happy about it. I see a lot of tussle between the co-founders. Who is going to be a CEO, right? It's a very common fight. And some of the startups actually end in the middle just because they can't agree who should be the CEO, right? CEO is actually not so cool job. If you become CEO, then you know that it's a lot of work, it's a lot of management. Sometimes being on the technology side is really nice. I like to be more on the technology side myself, right? And you find such people. So you should have a people with complementary skills, love what they're doing, and come together to realize the startup future. This exercise might take a lot of time, and I think it's important to spend this time and not to fast track forming a core team because you have a great vision. Because great vision is only achieved, or you can only realize the great vision if you have a strong core team. And also remember, if you get a wrong person in the team, maybe he's skilled, but he's not aligned with your vision or he's not going well with the other team members, that's a disaster. Getting someone away and basically releasing him and replacing him is not going to be easy, and it affects overall company stability and morale. So spending enough time on building core team is super important. Importance of diversity of skill sets and perspectives are important. As I said, diversity is of course important, but also there should be a team working culture, and people should like each other. Literally, they should like each other. They might have a different opinions, but they should like each other, and they should be clear about their roles and responsibilities before even you start. Um, the roles critical to startups are essentially the three different things: product ownership, technical, and business. Usually, business is what this person will take the CEO, and usually the product is kind of chief customer officer, so CCO, or product officer, whatever you call. And technical is essentially CTO. Or they can simply call them as co-founders and directors or whatever it is. But they should have a clear roles delegated to technical, business, and product management to make this core team stronger, more successful. All right, so building a culture of innovation and resilience is important. And diversity actually helps to have more innovative ideas. That's about the third one. And the fourth one, probably we will close it on the fourth today, half an hour already. So I'll take a few questions after that. Work on prototype. By, 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 by default or by standard practice, most of the startups primarily work on prototype, or what we call it as MVP, minimal viable product. This is a small product, relatively small, right? Prototype, which can actually showcase the functionality of the bigger product which you're going to build. And this MVP is very important because if you don't focus on the prototype MVP, nobody believes in idea. If you present slides, that's not very interesting for many people because it's just an idea is what people think. Could be a great idea, but still an idea. But most of the AI startups primarily work on prototype. These prototypes may not have the actual data because you might need real data, privacy, etc. You might use a public data, but you have to show that some area of this is actually working well, or the first use case or the interesting part of your startup is so showcased in prototype. This prototype will act as a marketing tool for you. It will act like a thing which actually attracts further funding, investors, partners, even employees, and you can go to the trade shows and showcase them. So prototype is really important. And you should take enough time to decide on what needs to be taken up as a prototype. The process and the importance of developing a minimum viable product to test the market, and very important, underscore this, minimal resources. So you should be smart enough to build a prototype with minimal resources. Sometimes you might use freelancers. Sometimes you want to basically ask a good friend who is working in another company to work on this project part-time and officially, but that's perfectly fine. Anyone can work on other projects without disturbing their full-time works, without affecting their full-time work. So as the startup owner or CEO, founder, co-founder, you should be smart enough to pull this off with a minimal resource, yet showcasing the best part of your startup, right? And as I said, so you should take your top use cases for MVP, which excites not only the target market, which is your customers, but also your team. Your team should be excited to build it, right? That should be the MVP. You have to build iteratively. It's important because you build a small piece and then you have a check with your target audience or some of your focus groups, could be your friends and families as well, and then get a feedback and again build another small piece of it and keep on doing it so that you are on track in building a great MVP, which will be showcased for your as a startup product. So it's important to build it incrementally, and also MVP actually works as a tool for early validation, right? Okay, so we are off now already. So I'm gonna keep the secure funding and discussions for the next session. I would like to see if we have any questions. What are the potential? Is there a question from LinkedIn? Vishnu, what are the potential risks and challenges involved in it? Well, that's a good question. When you're doing a startup, it's yeah, it is riskier when compared to you're working in a company for good salaries. So working for a startup or doing a AI startup is definitely riskier, right? But if you are smart, if you can pull the MVP, the minimal viable, the prototype with the minimal resources, then it is not very risky because the next step is actually funding. And when you get the funding, you not only secure the startup funding, you secure your salary as well from that point. And then it becomes less risky for you from a financial standpoint. From a startup success standpoint, I can already tell you the success rate of any startups, especially in AI, is less than 30%. And this is actually higher when compared to general tech startups, because AI startups are becoming more successful than a general tech startups as per the market reports. But you have a 30% success rate. Even if your startup does not become a huge success, right? It basically provides you a platform to build up something more on it. You could pivot your business model to build something even more great. So it is worth taking this risk, and it's also depends on your passion. Any further questions? I'm just watching the LinkedIn feed. Let me know if I missed any questions. All right. I have a question from Kavita. I agree with you that there are other factors about in this case. All right, that's good. Good. Thank you very much for joining this. I don't see any questions. You can always put it as answer of the session as well. That is fine. So we'll continue probably next week at similar timings. I'll post the next event. We'll continue the part 2 of the session. Thank you.